The lecture title of today is Building in Dialect. I think that a language and even more a dialect of a language is deeply rooted in the culture of a very specific place. And I think this is something very, very interesting for us as architects, wherever we go and wherever we try to be creative and build something, is to understand that culture. And I think it's about listening to the people from a specific place, learning from them. And I think, especially when you talk about a dialect, is mostly spoken, I think, in the countryside. So I think, especially from the countryside, wherever you are, you can learn a lot from the people there, listening to them, because most of the time, when they started to build something there, they had very limited resources, and they were very creative with these resources. And I think that's something where we can learn a lot these days, where we are overwhelmed with complexity but don't understand very simple processes anymore. And I think this is the point of the lecture, where we want to show certain techniques that we apply with our projects to go back to simplicity and to very simple logic ways that can be again implemented.
I wanted to talk today a little bit more about our theoretical approach in the office, and I think to talk a little bit more what inspires us and how we apply certain theory to our specific projects. And so again, what we've seen already in the documentary, it's something that we really believe in is tradition, and we don't necessarily believe in a kind of revolution than a design, but rather in a kind of evolution of the design. So we are inspired how things were done, because they always had a certain logic. There was always a why. How people built and the local craftsmanship, and how can we bring that into new something contemporary. I think we talk a lot about sustainability, and as we've seen in certain examples, I think we always try to come up with an intelligent structure or intelligent geometry of the building. But I think it's not just about that. I think if we want to go a little bit further in that, and I think I'm not afraid to say that we definitely believe in beauty. I think beauty will somehow save the world, and I believe in, let's say, in buildings that endure and buildings that are basically have a long-term value. So I don't think what we see these days is a lot of green buildings that maybe are not that green as they would wish to be, let's say. So this is, I think, something that I think is important: beauty and the quality of the buildings, to build with quality. As we build in different countries, as I mentioned already, it's very important to understand the culture, to understand the client, to understand certain problems, and where problems then eventually could become a potential. And as well, research and technology. I think that's something, I talked about it earlier today. I think the future is within new materials. It's not just about, we always have this discussion this day, there is the good building is made in wood and the bad building is made in concrete. I think it's not that easy. I highly believe in a kind of hybrid structure. I highly believe in a new approach and new materials. So, talking about context, I think for us as a studio, context goes way beyond just the physical perception of what you see around. So this is the image of the iceberg. Is actually what you see. The tip of the iceberg is maybe the finalized project, what you see, but what is behind there is somehow the part underneath the water. And this part underneath the water, I think, is not to underestimate. And I think this part underneath the water is rather influenced, of course, by culture, is influenced by geographical or political or societal, economical situation, and is influenced by technology for sure, as well as vernacular architecture. So what is vernacular architecture? This is an image of Bernard Rudowski that had a show in the MoMA in the 60s, where he explored building techniques and buildings where their classical profession of the architect, as we know it today, didn't exist at that time, basically. Marc-Antoine Laugier, with his concept of the primitive hut, so he was really questioning at the time, we're talking about 18th century, about what is architecture in a time in France where Baroque buildings were dominating the scene. So he was going back to the concept of the anthropological relationship between the human being and nature. Adolf Loos, which is one of my heroes, I studied in Vienna, so for me he was really definitely one of the true modernists of that time, and he once wrote a book about how to construct in the mountains. So the book was called Vom Bauen in den Bergen, and I just want to cite a second what he talks about here. And so he says, like, changes in the traditional way of building are only permitted if they are an improvement. Otherwise, stay what is traditional for truth, even if it be hundreds of years old, has a stronger inner bond with us than the lie that walks around our side. So what we see here is a classic, the modernism as we can see it. There is no relationship with the context anymore, and I also want to point out like what we had before and what we have right now. So where does this come from? So sometimes you ask yourself, are we lost this relationship with our country, with our identity? And there's also, what I think is very interesting are the essays of Kenneth Frampton, where he was really talking about, he's talking about this consumer area that somehow led to a kind of mediocre architecture within time, that we just get lost, we don't understand anymore. And just because we can do doesn't mean that it's good. So this was the opening of Rem Koolhaas at the Biennale 2014. So where we arrived right now with, a lot of laws, a lot of mechanical ventilation, just because as a society I think we got dumped somehow and we are not thinking clearly anymore. So if we think about how they used to deal with mechanical ventilation, these are like example of wind towers in the Middle East, where they solved these problems like hundreds and hundred years ago without slabs that were like 1.5 meters high. If you go back, and we recently did a competition in the Middle East, so this is an example of the Saudi black tent. So we were wondering, like, why is this tent black actually? And these Saudi tents were made of black goat hair, like local goat hair that he used to create this kind of textiles. And so basically they were black for a specific reason. And this is a PhD work about assessing the thermal performance of the Bedouin tents in hot climates, where basically the idea is that the sun heats up the surface, so basically hot air tends to go up and creates a kind of buoyancy effect, and this adds this kind of a cooling breeze effect inside the tent. So this was the reason why it was black, and there's a reason why these buildings look like this, and this is something where I think where Bernard Rudowski was talking about this identity, this local culture, this is something that is really inspiring myself. And going back to culture, this is where I come from originally, like from Alto Adige. So this is basically our culture in the valley, if you want so, with the Knödel and the classic Stube, it's called, so which is a very small space, mostly made in wood. And so the title of this lecture today is actually Building in Dialect. And building in dialect, for me, I mean that in a way that a language is always very, very strongly connected to a specific culture. And if you go even more deeper, it's more even the dialect. So that's even the extreme of the language. So, and I think we can learn a lot from this dialect somehow. We can really listen to people like this guy because they didn't have a lot of possibilities. They didn't have a lot of, let's say, money to construct something. So they did it always for a certain purpose. And this is something where we can learn today a lot. So every time when we are, we talk to clients or I go to the countryside, what I prefer most is to talk to this kind of people because you can learn a lot from them. So how can you transport that or bring that in a contemporary context, the vernacular architecture that I mentioned before? So this is an example, the Oberholz mountain hut. I'll try to go back if I can, which is this one here, which was a competition we won in 2015. And it's basically inspired by images like this. So it's inspired by the local culture, local material. There is a sloped roof. And I think it's always about the very simple ideas that you win competitions. So basically, it's almost this the structure that is branching out towards the three main mountains we see on the left image. So you have like 1, 2, 3. So every window focuses towards one tip of the mountain. And what you see here is a site plan. So it's a structure on 2,000 meters, restaurant with a terrace. So you arrive there in summer or winter, and you can have a break. You can eat a good knödel inside that hut. You see a little bit here, this is the built structure. You see that the entire building is rotated more towards the right because we had like a big discussion with the clients that were like 8 people. And they were mentioning another mountain, the Mendel, that is you can't see here because it's quite foggy. So we rotated this hut like 20 times to the left and to the right till it was like the final position. But what you see here is this idea of I think tradition, where you see the sloped roof, you see like local materials, you see like a wood structure, but then when you go to the inside, I think you have this contemporary moment where then this interpretation of the Stube comes into play, which is a kind of new way of opening the space. So you have these 3 pockets that give you a certain, an intimate space, but at the same time, you have this open, very open space. And I think the plan in this case is quite important because it's not just on a programmatic level, distinguishing, let's say, the public space, which is the restaurant, from the more private space or the more the utilized space, like the storage, the kitchen, and so on. But it's at the same time, as you've seen before, it's this wall here on the right that defines the spaces above ground and underground. And also, when we won this competition, the first question from the client was, did you do some structure on 2,000 meters? We said yes. Somehow we have the project somewhere, but it was not true. Like we had like, we said like we did something. They believed us and said, okay, let's give it a try with these architects. We didn't build anything at that point, 2,000 meters. So which is also another complexity to deal with, to build on 2,000 meters than within the city. So as you see here, we had like these prefabricated elements that we brought up, and we optimized a lot the structure. So this is also where I think it's about what I mentioned about technology, but it's not, we don't use like, I think, parametric tools in the office to generate form, but we rather use it to optimize structure and work together with the engineers to create something more meaningful, also in mock-ups, like in this case, to discuss with the clients the functionality. And it's actually a small project, so for the furniture, in the end, we came to the point after like quite a lot of meetings with companies in Milan that we didn't find the right product. So we also, in this case, we designed our furniture and modified the typical alpine chair, made it a little bit more contemporary with the materials. In this case, also for the benches, this is like Loden. It's a very typical material from that area. So we created like all the furniture. This was also a very interesting experience to bring the sink up on 2,000 meters in one concrete piece. That was also very funny. And here you see again, I think what I mentioned before, that structure is very important for us. I think structure is something beautiful, something that we want to amplify within a geometry. And this connection with nature, I think, when you are at this place, and when you sit down to connect, to look out of the window, and somehow, I think if it's doing the right job, it slows you down. And this is what these projects are also about. So it's a kind of a radical new interpretation of the tourism, as I mentioned also in the documentary. And it's not about the classic hotel structure, but it's about the experience. And also within developing this architecture, we have this very strong connection within a specific area, whether it's in Germany or it's in Austria, in this kind of alpine context. So these are examples of how can we transform inspiration in an evolution of design. And these are, I think, again, our starting images, like how can we do that? How can we create new experiences? And I think it's, as I mentioned, it's not about going to the classical hotel, parking your garage, going up to the room. I think it's not a problem if you need to walk from these treehouse structures and it's a little bit of, there's a little bit of rain or snow and you need to walk to this restaurant that is a separate hut then, that has a separate lounge area where you can again enjoy, let's say, different views. Again, the vernacular, the local context, the evolution of it. So this is what we call the evolution. That is, I think, deeply rooted also within structure. These are a couple of examples of projects we are developing in Kitzbühel at the moment. So it's the structure that again is visible, that creates this kind of harmony within the spaces. A similar project we presented at the Salon del Mobile for the vertical chalets, which is again this kind of slow down tourism I was talking before. And it's about to lie in the bed, to watch outside and to get inspired by nature. And I think you're in this cocoon-like structure, almost in a bird's nest, where you're watching out and feel the connection with nature. So it doesn't need to be always a hotel. So it's a similar concept for this project here, which is called the Mirror Houses that we built in Bolzano. So it's not the typical hotel, but we had like a client that actually lived in a country house here next to it and had like a certain volume and asked us to design like 2 units that you can rent. But there was a problem. There's a big garden in front of this country house with a pool. So the client said, actually, I don't want to see this structure in my garden because it's going to annoy me. So we came up with a kind of solution to make them disappear in the garden, almost like a sculpture. That again, you see basically the reflection here on the left side. So this is the country house or the farmhouse that then you see as a kind of projection within the facade. So it's this kind of duality of the facade. On one side, the east facade that is completely open versus the north facade. And I need to say that is a north facade because that's the only way this project would work. We have other examples of mirror-clad facades where I think it's a really bad idea. But anyway, so landscape and this what I mentioned before, this idea of transforming a problem into a potential is something that is interesting for us. Like in this case, the wind. So to create this kind of undulating structure that, or ribbon-like structure that creates this internal courtyard. And it was really like this when we stand up on this hill, on this vineyard. Very, very beautiful. in Alto Adige for the first time. It was August, and I remember the wind was blowing as hell, so you could not even, almost talk outside. And so this is again a kind of, I think, listening to the place also in terms of materials, in terms of this ribbon-like structure that evolves out of this perimeter wall. So it's basically the extension of it with the same material on this hill. That of course opens to different mountains and to the village down. Yeah, welcome to the Dolomites. As I mentioned before, I am from there. I think the last 20 years there was definitely a big, more a revolution than an evolution within the industry, especially if you talk about the hotel industry. A lot of things were built there. At the moment, it's a little bit more difficult, which I think is also absolutely okay. So we got asked in 2015 to participate in a competition of this, to transform basically this hotel that you see down. This is an Alpe di Siusi in Alto Adige. So this is how the hotel looked before, like this classic overloaded kitsch. So the client had a very clear idea. He wanted to do like a flat roof, and he wanted to do a pool there because the neighbor just restructured the hotel. So it was this kind of more is more. If he has 4 saunas, we need to do a 5th. So I told him like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not our approach. So we came back with a very simple idea to bring the mountain back into the hotel. I think that was the concept. This was the rendering for the competition and the built reality. 4 months of construction, as we mentioned before. Simona mentioned that, so it's definitely an Alto Adige reality to build a hotel in 4 months. At the same time, we redid our office here in Milano. That took, I think, longer for much less square meters. And so it's again this kind of opening towards the mountain. I think the structure, the logic of the facade. So you have this north facade that is more flat, and the kind of south facade that creates this loggias for natural sun protection to create a very minimalist alpine interior, not overloaded spaces. And we also worked with the son of the owner that is doing this beautiful photography. So we have this kind of very beautiful art photography in the different bar, restaurants, and as well as the rooms. So you see again this exoskeleton detail. All the facade is done with a render that is inspired by the Dolomitgestein, so the local stone from that place. Here's a sketch where you see the north facade versus the south facade. So the concept is based according to the program, of course, where you have the more corridors and circulation on the northwest facade, and then the opening the spaces towards the mountain. So these are a couple of images where you see this roughness. So we like real materials to bring this rock idea back into, for example, this bar as a detail. Construction, of course, it was a wood construction, much faster. I think also almost impossible to do it not in a wood structure. Time-wise, I think. The vernacular interpretation of the barn structure, of the scale, I think this is something that evolved in this project to create, to analyze a very banal, if you want, so pattern of a balcony, and to bring this into a kind of structure for the facade, for these balconies. Also here the client comes from an agricultural background, so maybe there was another reference that inspired us for this building. It was done during Corona, so the workers there, at that time, you could just only have 5 people of the same company on the construction site. So here the workers, after like 2 weeks, were so bored that they did like 2 shifts. So they had the day shift and the night shift and were working 24/7. The hotel was open, but nobody came because it was Corona, unfortunately. But the hotel was finished, I think, in 4 months, more or less, a little bit more. You see again this contrast that I was also talking before about this more dark shell and the bright interiors. I was talking before about the history, and I think that history is always important for the communication with a client because you cannot deny history. So I think if a client understands the history, he understands the design. And it's, in this case, a project we are developing in Berlin. We're developing a master plan around a so-called Stienitzsee that nobody knows in Berlin. It's like 40 minutes from Berlin. There are a lot of lakes, but this one is still not so known. But I think we have a very interesting client for this project that wants to develop the next sport and art culture with a very, very high level of international artists and as well architects that will be involved in this project. But the first project we did there was actually a villa. But here you see a little bit the context. So there is this amazing history of the Turbinenhalle. It's almost like a Tate Modern of Berlin. It has this great history that is now transformed this Turbinenhalle in the first part of a museum. So there were like, there's very inspiring, there were like bricks produced there, and they shipped the bricks, like they produced the bricks and shipped them through the canals. You can go till Berlin. And there is this very interesting history of the Villa Thyssen, Villa Oppenheimer. So it has a lot of inspiration, I think. And basically our inspiration for this villa project comes out of this sketch here, which is exactly the site where we are building our villa. And this was like a factory for drying those bricks. And our idea was basically to cut out a chunk of this historical structure almost and we bring it up in this design. So it's almost like if you know, history is never erased. So you bring it back and you try to somehow explain that project to a client that he immediately got, and now we start construction soon, I hope. And so we're working on this another couple of projects there. There will be like another exhibition space, sculpture gardens, and so on. So the brick, in this case, this tradition and history of the brick that we try to implement in the facade, in the details, I would say. Another project that we're currently is under construction in Austria, which I think is mostly about this residential development. It's mostly about the transparency, like how can we open this building towards the lake? How can we create privacy within this structure? Of course, we have a kind of straitjacket almost in this project because it's determined by a lot of building codes and a lot of codes, and so we try to take as much as possible out of it, I would say. An installation we did, like a very small one, so we just not interested just big structures. This was a very small project here for the Salone del Mobile, the Future Space Pavilion, which is inspired by this Ca' Grande, which is the first Renaissance building in Milan. And it's a reinterpretation, a very radical one of this, the essence of the Renaissance buildings, which is like geometry, symmetry, that we try to reorganize within these wings and structure as well. So if you, during the Salone, you could sit down here, have like, after a lot of partying, we had these 2 benches that people really appreciated. You could sit down and have a little break there. And so what we mentioned in the documentary is a sustainability through intelligent geometry, but I think, of course, we heard about the flexibility with the exoskeleton. We heard about this project about almost like a celebration of the North Light. So it's really the fifth facade, which is the roof that opens up. But I think it's also about, you know, a context can also be like a historical context of a company that in this case is a leading company in Bologna that produces gearboxes, Ridutori. And so we try to implement this company culture as an inspiration for the facade. So these were actually the first sketches where you see these gearboxes like that have this very, rigid geometry that then we were inspired by those to bring it in the facade that filters the light, that filters the harsh south light. So this is something that that we thought that could be interesting, and we won that competition. So it's currently under construction, as we have seen. So this is the north facade, this very elegant exoskeleton that gives us a lot of freedom within the office spaces to not have any columns there. The south facade that filters the harsh light. Some details now from rendering to, I think this was last week, I think. The beauty of the staircase, the interiors when you go up, like from the ground floor, the entrance, and there will be another one on the 6th and 7th floor, a spiral staircase that connects the meeting room. And it's this fifth facade I talked before that then has, on every level, it's almost like punch these terraces, so you give a lot of quality for the office space, like people can go out, they have this free space that they can enjoy. The bridge that connects on a certain level, and yeah, the project was presented at the Biennale in Venice. You see, like, welcome to Corona times. We were all happy. We just, Tilda, yes, was pretty small here. As Silvana mentioned, she saw quite a few architecture exhibitions, I think. And the last project, I think, because then we're out of time, is this project in Abu Dhabi that we definitely saw. It was a spam email, but we came there. Thanks to Silvana also, that said, no, let's write him back. So a couple of weeks later, we were there in Abu Dhabi. We were inspired in a line by this light patterns of the palm trees and this natural way of transporting water. We were inspired, of course, of this Meshrabia culture that filters the light. It's not just for the sunlight, but also for great privacy within their culture, within their spaces, like the Majlis place. Like if you go to a villa in Abu Dhabi, you are not going directly inside the villa, but you go to the external Majlis, where basically you have a tea, you have a coffee. So also on a programmatic level, we were pretty much inspired by the culture. So it was basically a villa made out of 3 villas that has a central element to water on the inner courtyard, so everything is more closed from the outside, and everything focuses on this internal courtyard, the privacy, the Meshrabia that filters the light. You can see here, this is the view from the kitchen and or the gym, towards the gym, with this courtyard that opens. On the first level, we have more the sleeping, the bedrooms. So you have more privacy, you have this filtered light within the spaces. And also here we tried since the beginning to work with the engineers to create an intelligent structure, to test these different Meshrabias, to give it a contemporary approach, to work with sustainability again, being inspired from what is there, like this wind towers, cross ventilation that they used like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We interpreted that in a skylight that you can see in section. You can open and you have this natural ventilation through the courtyard, while at the same time it's a green garden on the inside. And so I think these are the last slides that I want to show because we're also out of time now, I would say. And I just want to finish with a sentence that I think it represents us, like I would say, pretty well, and it's like bringing back the past, another way of looking into the future. Thank you very much.